Welcome to this Usanas Foundation event for the day. Now I invite Abdullah to please address us today. And if I have spelled your second name wrong, your surname wrong, please do let me know how to pronounce it clearly. I'm sorry about
Sure.
that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite all right. And thank you for Usanas Foundation for having me. I'm delighted to be here. This for the opportunity for me to speak up on the issues that I feel very passionate about it. I think many political science observers, politicians, researchers, academicians, journalists, who study Turkey have difficulty in making sense of what's really driving the agenda behind the Turkish foreign policy, and the main reason for the confusion is because so many policy decisions we see from the current government led by President Erdogan in Turkey is not really serving to the interests of the national security requirements of 83 million nation. It simply doesn't make any sense at all when you see a country isolated and insulated so much, not only in the region-wise, but also from the traditional partners and allies. In the region, they have pretty much huge trouble with all the neighbors. I don't remember in my lifetime or from reading the books, from the history books, Turkey has never been so much isolated and insulated. So that tells us something really terribly wrong with the decision-making process in terms of the standard operating procedures in the government bureaucracy, but also policy choices when it comes to the real actions on the ground. It does make a sense when you look at from the personal interests of the leadership, the current leadership of Turkey. That doesn't necessarily mean whatever Turkey is doing is actually promoting its own, interests. Whether you look at from the real politics or from ideal politics, it doesn't matter. So if you make that distinction, the interest of the current leadership in Turkey is not really overlapping with the interest of the Turkish national security or foreign policy interests, then it will be much easier to understand, what's going on with the Turkish policy decision, domestic wise or the foreign policy wise. Let me start by saying, by recalling my, memory when I was in Ankara, in the capital of Turkey. It was in 2015. There was a huge gathering of, Hizb ut-Tahrir group, international network. All the, leaders from different countries, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, from Middle East, all over the world. They wanted to have a huge convention to talk about the Caliphate. How can they revive the Caliphate in the Turkish territory? So all the talking heads from this group, they actually came to Turkey to hold a major a convention. At the time, and it is still is actually, the Hizb ut-Tahrir was designated as a terrorist organization in Turkey. Because in many countries you see them, promoting this idea of caliphate, and they deny the violence, and they deny arms and other activities. But in Turkish context, the past criminal investigation actually find out some of these groups is linked with the violence and the arms. So the police run their operation, they were indicted, they were prosecuted, at the end of the trial, of course, some of these people associated with the Hizb ut-Tahrir in Turkey, they were convicted and sent to jail. So under the criminal justice system, it has been for a long time listed and designated as a terrorist organization. So it was quite unimaginable for me to see this organization a supposedly illegal organization, organizing a huge convention, inviting all the different leaders from different countries. If I remember correctly, even from India, some people came. And I mean, it was an illegal enterprise, and what they have been doing was illegal. So the governor in Ankara, in the capital of Turkey, they denied the permission, of course, under the laws. That's the only choice the governor could move forward. But what happened was, a week later, a senior government official intervened into this process, and they allowed this Hizb ut-Tahrir to hold this convention. It was a huge showcase. It was televised live. It was covered by the media, and they were advocating to revitalizing the Caliphate base, from Turkey. Of course, they have a huge ambition to expand this beyond the Turkish borders. So at the time, I realized, what's the Turkish law or the Turkish constitution is saying doesn't matter with this political Islamists who sort of hijacked the government in Turkey using the election process, the ballot boxes. But once they feel confident enough in the government, they actually doesn't want anything to do with this democratic process, alternate government as such. So that's how I think all this started. There are so many different road markers we sort of detected in this process. Another example, I think from the recent one, perhaps you all remember in December 2016, a Turkish police officer, 22 years old, very young man, who killed and assassinated a Russian ambassador, Andrei Karlov, in the art gallery in the evening of the December 19, 2016. And later on, when the investigation launched into this guy, who was killed, of course, by the police, I think it was a deliberate action of killing him just to silence him up. And the investigation sort of find out this guy was radicalized by several preachers, two of them, two imams, who are on the government payroll, working for the government religious authority, Diyanet. So the guy, this police officer who, assassinated the Russian envoy, frequently meeting with these imams, getting, radical ideas from this group. And so many different connections, all leading up to the senior officials in the government. So they sort of hushed up the investigation. But one thing that stuck out, there was an expert report on his computer. What was he reading? What kind of searches he was running, and especially on YouTube, he was watching different radical jihadist videos, and one of them is actually a British national of Indian origin. So there is a connection to India in that sense. His name is Abu Basir al-Hindi. And the guy, I think 5 days before he assassinated Russian ambassador, he was watching, the video about this, British of the Indian origin guy who actually killed in November 2015 while fighting for Al-Nusra Front in Syria, very close to the Turkish border. And later, when I looked that up, so many of stories about this guy actually written in Turkish. They made a book about him, and they were, freely circulating in different bookstores in Turkey. So it's sort of a permissive environment under the political leadership. You see all this kind of jihadist ideas, and the people, even the police officers who are supposed to protect, the ambassador, just assassinating him, getting radicalized under this, permissive environment. So the words really, doesn't matter. When you hear this, narrative from the leaders of Turkey, it has a huge impact. It has a cascading impact, when you go down, to the lower levels. I think what I'm trying to say is there is a huge ideological motivation that drives the Turkish policy decision-making process for the moment when we look at Turkey, and that's very dangerous. I think the Hagia Sophia, as a moderator mentioned briefly, turning this used to be a museum, now turned into mosque. It has been a huge cause for the political Islamist group in Turkey. Perhaps only 5% of the Turkish population care about it, but it was a huge, immensely important issue personally for President Erdogan, because he said it openly. When he was young, he had been protesting on the streets to open this museum into mosque. And when he had a power, and when he felt comfortable enough, he made a move, turned this museum into a mosque. So this, there is a symbolism, of course, there is an ideology, but beyond all this, there is actually policy being pursued by the current government of Turkey, and the ramification is not limited to Turkey. You see, from the activities around the world, from Asia to Africa, from Middle East to Europe, even in the United States, they use, not only Hizb ut-Tahrir, but also Muslim Brotherhood Network, Jamaah Islamiyah, so all sort of different Islamist groups to promote this agenda in all the different countries. They employ different tactics, different means when it comes to Europe and the United States. They of course exploit the democratic rights, fundamental freedoms to make inroads in those societies. When it comes to Africa or Middle East, they provide guns, logistical support, and finances for these groups to expand their operative ground. So this is, I think, a really dangerous pattern. We see we need to be very concerned about it, and I mean, with the massive purges we have seen in the Turkish government bureaucracy, things got from bad to worse. When I talk about this Hizb ut-Tahrir holding a major convention to resurrect the Caliphate back in 2015, there were still many veteran police chiefs who have been tracking, monitoring. There have been judges, prosecutors who can launch investigation, filing indictments. A military, the NATO's second largest army in terms of manpower, so many generals and admirals, they were very much opposed to this kind of activity. But after 2016, when Erdogan government orchestrated this false flag coup in the military in July 2016, they used that as a pretext to get rid of all these important people, senior officials in the government civil service, from the police force, from the intelligence service, from the military, judiciary, you name it. I mean, so many veteran police chiefs who have been working Al Qaeda and ISIS for years, they have been simply, pushed out from the government service. Not only that, some of them, they were later jailed on dubious charges. While this was happening, on cracking down on Al Qaeda and ISIS or other violent jihadist groups in Turkey, that stopped. So many of them they just simply get released from prison. Hardly any criminal investigation going on into these cells in Turkey, because the judges, the police chiefs, and others, they get the signal from the Erdogan government. Why do you risk yourself going after Islamist groups, whether that will be a violent ones like ISIS, Al Qaeda, because you'll get punished. So they don't want to touch these groups, and they get the signal from the political leadership. So this is the landscape we are facing for the moment. As I said, this is a ramification beyond the Turkish borders because they have been funding, they have been providing logistical support, diplomatic support to these groups in other countries as well. And you can easily find out when you look at the traffic, for example, from different countries, from Asia, Europe. They all come to Turkey to expand their wings, to breathe easily, and launch their organization, expand their operation, and go back to their own countries. Let me stop here. Then I think we can expand further, perhaps with the questions later on.
So I just want to understand one thing from you, Bipindra. What is the sort of acceptance that the idea of secularism on which the Turkish nation, I mean, is there an acceptance for the idea of secularism among the Turkish population right now in Turkey? If you could just throw some light on that. One second, I'll have to unmute you. 1 second.
Yeah, you could say there is a general acceptance of the secularism as a pillar of the Turkish constitution, of course, as enshrined there. But in terms of practicing the secularism, in the past governments, before Erdogan came to power, as a political Islamist leader, in the first and the second term, of course, there are so many other factions within the party, and it's balancing his desire or the motions. So it wasn't really a political Islamist party in that sense in the first and the second term. But as soon as he felt confident enough, perhaps in 2010, 2011, he pushed out the different faction within the party, marginalized, and he put more Islamists on the ticket in the next election. He sort of monopolized the power within the ruling party. But before he came to power in 2002, if you look at the practices of the past governments in 80s, 90s, there was a huge, problematic application of the secularism. It was very hardcore. It wasn't really, allowing any sort of different Islamist groups to practice their religion. I'm not just talking about the political Islamists. I mean, for example, young girls, they just wanna, put a scarf on their head and they wanna attend the colleges and the universities. They were not allowed to do so. If you're a government employee and for personal reasons you want to cover your head as a woman, and you couldn't do it. So this kind of harsh practices in the past sort of blow back later on. So when the opposition parties on the center left, they try to promote the secular idea. People recall those times, those terrible times. If they don't want to go back, so it's sort of Turkey moved from one extreme to another extreme in that sense. But I think generally you could say an acceptance in the Turkish society, the secular values and ideas. But of course, the institutions that are supposed to protect the secularism in the constitution, like the judiciary, or the military, used to be a guardian of the Turkish constitution. They are no longer there. The media landscape is completely decimated. The independent, critical, and opposition media is gone. The judges and the prosecutor who are supposed to protect the constitution is no longer there, because in 2016 we have seen for the first time the arrest of 2 members of the Constitutional Court. I mean, it's unprecedented. Without any due process at all, overnight, they were branded as a terrorist. They were arrested because they had the immunity. You need to follow very rigorous, very strict procedures in order to go after a top judge. They didn't care about it. So this kind of protection, I think, is no longer there, unfortunately, in the Turkish society. Perhaps with this bad practice with the Turkish Islamists, it may come back very forcefully, and people would realize, well, secularism is not a bad thing at all. even though there was some bad practices in the past. But look what Islamists has been doing to our country. I mean, they messed up everything from the foreign policy, economy, and all the other policy areas. So, yeah, I think the short answer, there's a general acceptance to that.
Okay, in opposition to this Islamist policies of Erdogan, is there some kind of a political opposition to it inside, and how powerful is this opposition?
Well, the opposition is very much fragmented and fractured, unfortunately, and Erdogan government is sort of exploiting this friction in the opposition bloc. But I think they are learning. You know, after each and every election, when they got beaten, they sort of coming together, try to form a bloc, a united bloc against President Erdogan, and sort of they managed to take away major cities in the last year's election in Istanbul and Ankara. And they used to be in the Erdogan's party for many years. And people, reacted, and the opposition sort of united. And these, mayoral positions, although it's sort of symbolic, went to the opposition parties. I think main optimism when I look at Turkey comes from two things. One is the diverse demographic structure. There's a Kurds, there's Alevis. I mean, no matter how much pressure you can bring to bear upon, all the different sectors in the society, still very, diverse society we have. So eventually it's going to rupture. There's a certain threshold and there's a certain boiling point, and it will rupture, especially with the economic difficulties Turkey has been going on right now. And other, main reason for, to be optimistic for Turkey is the finances of the economy. Turkey is very much dependent outside trade investment. I mean, they don't have a huge oil reserves and the gas reserves. They cannot sustain the economy by isolating itself from the rest of the world, by pursuing this political Islamist agenda that bothers everybody in the region and beyond the region. So eventually it needs to go back to the normalcy.
Okay, so we'll take a couple of questions that have come from our participants. One question from Shaukat Ali is that Erdogan is quoting all sections of the Muslim community in including followers of Zakir Naik, the Salafists, the Barelvis, the Deobandis, and all forms. Is Erdogan's foreign policy, this Islamist push and a global Islamic idea, a threat to India? Is a question that has come.
I think first and foremost, these policies are a threat to Turkey itself, because Turkey is predominantly a Sunni nation. When you play with the Salafis, jihadist ideologies, you risk radicalizing your own population. Then it will become a huge, security threat to your own country. I mentioned this police officer, 22 years old, who killed, Russian ambassador in 2016 because of the Russian involvement in Syria, and the dynamics changed, and the opposition had to push back, especially, the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other, radical groups. They had to push back because of the Russian involvement. So, I mean, even the police officer were supposed to protect, the others, take the matter in his own hands and, killed a high-profile ambassador in the Turkish capital. So that's for one. So it's a threat to Turkey first and foremost. And the secondly, of course, the immediate neighbors. There are so many, not only Turkish, but also Muslim groups in the neighboring countries that Erdogan and his political Islamist associate tap onto, sort of mobilize and support and create a sort of proxy groups for political purposes. Then, of course, on the third layer comes to nations like India and Bangladesh, Thailand, and other countries in Asia, and Muslim minority groups in Europe, and Zakir Naik, other radical Indian preachers. They often come to Turkey. They have a connection with different NGOs aligned with the President Erdogan. So it's not directly moving on the first level, interacting with the government officials. Perhaps they do, we don't see it privately, but they do it openly on the second track with for example, when Zayik Nair came, he often, worked with the IHH, International Humanitarian Organization, which is, um, um, you know, listed in the United Nations Security Council by Russia as an, aiding and abetting to Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. There are so many evidences came out of this group, how they have been transporting arms, providing logistical supplies to Al Qaeda groups in Syria. And Zayik Raik, cooperating with this group in Turkey. And IHH, by the way, is an extension of the Turkish intelligence agency, MIT. I mean, I publish so many wiretaps, obtained by the course when they have been investigating the Al Qaeda cells in Turkey. These IHH guys, they have been there. They have been working with this Al Qaeda. We could see it on the phone wiretaps. So this is, of course, a huge threat to India and other countries. There's a huge, Muslim population there. Not all of them, of course, follow the line or adopt the narrative that we see from the Turkish government leadership. But of course, there's a risk for expansion. When you see the moves of like Hagia Sophia, turning into a mosque, then that has an immediate impact. I seen, imams in Afghanistan, for example, in the Friday prayers, openly praising President Erdogan and asking for the conversion of the churches, even in Europe, to the mosque. So, I mean, they get mobilized, they get, inspired by these moves. And of course, you have seen the Zahir Naik's, press statement, on a YouTube. He went at length to justify Erdogan's action. So this kind of moves, I think, is quite risky and quite dangerous, and risking undermining the national security of India and as well as other countries.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I think you have covered a lot about what is happening in Turkey and Erdogan's ideology and long-term ambitions. And I have read your previous articles also. I think there was one on the India connections. After that, I researched on the subject, and I was deputed in Kashmir as an advisor to the governor, and I was researching on the militancy over there. So there, it really grabbed my interest in terms of like why Turkey is so much interested in India. And then I wrote a couple of papers and articles on this subject. So the first one was on in 2018 December. It was for Haaretz, when hardly anyone was talking in India about it. And in fact, our strategic experts and intelligence agencies, they would say that, I mean, Turkey is a camelist secular nation. Oh, come on, what are you talking? We are not interested in what you're talking. So, but then I think now, especially after the abrogation of Article 370, people have realized, the folks in India, in the intelligence community and the strategic affairs community, that this is a different Turkey, and it's not Turkey. It's basically the President Erdogan and his ambitions. So I'll just like to go back to this historical connection between India and Turkey. Okay? If we go back around 1,000 years back, the first invaders who came to India, the Muslim invaders, they used to call it slave dynasty, as what they are referred in the history, because most their founders were the slaves who were bought in the markets of Baghdad. But they used to call them Turkish. They were Turks. Okay? Mostly from the eastern Turkestan area. Sultan Iltutmish, Razia Sultana, and all those people were in that group, in that dynasty. After that, when the Mughals came, Mughals had the Mongol blood and Chagatai blood in their genealogy. Okay? So there has always been a connect. But then the Mughal king declared himself the caliph, because they were one of the most powerful and the richest empires in the world. And it started from Akbar, who declared himself as the Imam of the age. And then the people, the subjects in the Mughal empire read khutbah in the name of the Mughal king. So after that, a connect in terms of the religious authority. It kind of stopped between India and Turkey. For long, India was sending, the Mughal king was sending presents to Mecca and Medina, and nominal relationship was there, but there was not much connected. But then came the revolt of 1857, after which it was a huge setback to the Mughal nobility and the aristocracy in India. And after that, a large number of them, in fact, a big chunk of them, migrated to Turkey. So with that once again began the India-Turkey connect. And for long after, Brits believed that it was the revolt incited by the remnants of the Mughal rulers, and the Muslims were behind that. So they kind of marginalized Muslims from the government services, and they always looked at them with suspicion. Okay? And in the meantime, a good part of the nobility migrated to Turkey, migrated to Afghanistan. Okay? But then the British policy changed, because even the Hindus in India, they became seditious. And in 1870, Mr. William Hunter, the British administrator, came with a book called Indian Musalman, in which he suggested to the government that the Hindus are becoming seditious, so you must cultivate the Muslims against the Hindus. And this separatist or a divisive British politics of pitting Muslims against Hindus started with that. Then come to the year 1920, when after the First World War, the Turkish Caliphate was being dismembered, okay? And those talks were pretty much in discussion in India. Okay? Mahatma Gandhi started Khilafat movement in India in 1919. Most of the people in India believe that Khilafat was some kind of a revolt against the British. I mean, in Urdu, when we use the word Khilafat, it means going against someone. But they fail to realize that the Khilafat is not just about revolting against the British government, but it was primarily to restore the Caliphate, the Turkish Caliphate, because it had a major sentimental value in India, because there was this huge Muslim community in India. So a lot of people, especially the Muslim community, joined that Khilafat movement because it was a rallying cry for a genuine Muslim cause in India. And it happened like that. But then Mahatma Gandhi did not realize that giving a religious narrative to this whole independence or the freedom movement discourse will turn into a Frankenstein's monster later. Later in 1922, after the Chauri Chaura incident, Mahatma Gandhi withdrew the Khilafat movement. But then this whole thing left a big trail of the communal sentiments and a very, I would say, strong sentiment of political Islam among the Muslim community and the Muslim leaders of India. So it ended there, but then the connections with the Turkey did not end. They kind of, progressed after that incident also. So then in 1921, during this revolt only, there was this big movement of communal rights in Kerala. Just give me a moment. Communal rights in Kerala, and it's called the Mapila communal rights in Kerala. It happened because of this whole communal sentiment, which generated after this 1919 Khilafat movement. So, what I want to say here is that, it's not ISIS which kind of launched the first jihad to restore caliphate. No? Mahatma Gandhi did that. His purpose or his intentions might have been very different. But then, it kind of, it was a movement to restore caliphate. That's what we have to understand while addressing this issue. Now I'm coming back to the present times. Okay, in the last 2-3 years, or maybe 4 or 5 years, President Erdogan has been working very seriously with the Indian Muslims. Okay, and his approach has been on a multiple track to address the cause of the Indian Muslims. In Kashmir, I must say, he has emerged as some kind of a leader of the Ummah. And people really like him a lot. They are investing majorly in the youth and the media. TRT World, Turkish radio and television, has been doing immense amount of coverage of Kashmir stories, okay? And they are very selective and they are very biased. Now the question here is that the TRT videos and TRT coverage is very sophisticated, almost equivalent to what BBC or Al Jazeera or CNN does. So that creates a massive impact. The presentation is brilliant, and the anchors, I mean, I guess they are pretty well trained, and I should really appreciate Erdogan in this whole perception and the narrative warfare, that it's making a huge impact. Like, for instance, TRT World, they made a video, and it's still on the internet, in which they were discussing the Kashmir conflict, and they said that RSS, the Hindu nationalist organization, massacred 1 lakh Hindus in 1947. Now, as an Indian citizen, agreed, it's perfectly fine. RSS is a Hindu nationalist organization and maybe fundamentalist one. Okay? But there is no evidence, there is no proof, or there is nothing, as such in any of the historical records of such a massacre happening in the history of Kashmir. Most of the Marxist and the leftist historians of India who are staunchly anti-RSS, they have completely rejected this idea of RSS massacring 1 lakh Muslims in Kashmir, which is totally false. In fact, the truth is totally different. In 1947, the common people of Kashmir, including the Muslims in the Kashmir area, the Buddhists in the Ladakh, and the Hindu majority in Jammu region, they chose to join India. The Maharaja of Kashmir was a little shy. He was hesitant, Mr. Maharaja Hari Singh. He had his ambitions of making Kashmir an independent Switzerland-like country. But the most popular leader of Kashmir, Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, did not like Jinnah at all, and he wanted to join India, the secular India. And surprisingly, it is a historical fact that in entire India, communal revolts were taking place due to the partition, but in Kashmir, there was not a single revolt. Now, coming back to the present in Kashmir, so I just mentioned that TRT World is creating a lot of propaganda machinery and luring youth. They are giving a large number of scholarships, and they are inviting people, mostly the journalists and the young students of Kashmir, the young generation, on scholarships, fellowship programs, and exchange visits to Kashmir, so to Turkey. In the last 3-4 years, if you look at the trend in Kashmir, most of the youngsters, they are preferring Turkey for their higher education and even for their professional educational programs over the SAARC countries and even over India. Here, I would also like to mention that in some cases, there were the Kashmiri students who are studying in places like Bangalore and all, they had to face some kind of a mob violence. So that also added to their insecurities, but I mean, that's a minor factor motivating. But the prominent factor is the Erdogan's outreach among the young generation of Kashmir. And his outreach has various different models. Like, on one hand, he will be approaching extreme Salafi clerics, giving the cause of Islam. On the other hand, he is approaching the Athkadi, the so-called Sufi Barelvi Muslims of Kashmir, who are against the Salafi ideology, but they kind of love Erdogan because there he projects his image as the leader of the Ummah. And on the third strain, he would be approaching this young generation of the Muslims who are relatively liberal, moderate, and secular. And to them, his style is different. He would be making Kashmir a cause of human rights, Kashmir a cause of civil rights movement, and he would say that this is about your right to self-determination. India is acting as a fascist power. And let me tell you, all this done in a very selective manner. Okay, they don't, the TRT world and the Turkish propaganda machinery, they hardly talk about Jamaat-e-Islami and its radical agenda. They hardly talk about what Lashkar-e-Taiba and Pakistan-supported terrorist organizations are doing in Kashmir. Pakistan-supported terrorist groups, they are killing minority people. They are killing even the Muslims who don't agree with their idea. They believe in the Takfiri ideology. Like recently, most of the people, the local Muslims who joined politics and the local panchayat, the local self-government elections, they were shot dead by the terrorist organizations because these guys fear that if they join the local political parties, that might erode their value and that might improve their faith in Indian democracy, which is something which they don't want. And in Kashmir, another way of approaching the youth is through soft power. This new series, Dilris Ertugrul Ghazi, is a massive hit in Kashmir, especially during the post-370 communication and security lockdown. People were watching downloaded versions of it, and now the people are naming their sons and daughters after Ghazi. Now they're naming their kids and daughters after the main character of the serial, Ertugrul Ghazi. In the rest of the India, Erdogan, through his propaganda machinery, is approaching the prominent Muslim clerics, which includes famous names like Salman Nadwi And even Zakir Naik is a famous Salafi cleric who is absconding and he's facing the terror charges. Okay? He spoke at Tugwa, which is an Islamist center, I think managed and controlled by Erdogan's sons, Bilal Erdogan. Besides that, they are also making an outreach among the political, some of the groups which are not essentially jihadists, but I prefer to call them Islamist groups because they believe in the Maududi ideology of political Islam, the same Muslim Brotherhood ideology, but they don't actively, like, very formally engage in violence. One such group is PFI and SDPI, which has made a huge presence all over the country now. Even in the remote northeastern states like Manipur, they have a major presence. In my state, they have a very strong presence. In the recent Bangalore riots and the Delhi riots, PFI played a major role. So there is a strong likelihood. In fact, there is an ample evidence now that I would say the global Islamist organizations and the Jamaat-e-Islami proxies based in US also in touch and connection with the Erdogan's this network of controlling the global Islamist charities. They played a major role in funding, financing these guys and fomenting unrest here. Besides that, he is approaching the prominent community personalities. Like, for instance, Amir Khan. Amir Khan is a very popular Bollywood hero. He's popular among Hindus and Muslims both. And recently, we all heard about his meetings with the First Lady of Turkey. And I also heard about, there have been cases of people getting citizenship in Turkey. They invest a certain amount and then they get to stay in Turkey. So this is one way of making an outreach. Besides that, on social media, TRT Urdu has come up. Even apart from that, on WhatsApp, they are making an active use to promulgate videos about, fabricating information about the Hindutva group's activities in India and like trying to create a completely new Muslim identity in India. GESAM, which is a think tank based in Turkey, and they mostly deal with the South Asian activities. So they have kind of formulated a strategy which, in a way, wants to espouse a common Muslim identity in the entire South Asia, which includes the Muslims of Pakistan and India and Kashmir also. So that is going to be very dangerous for India tomorrow, and it will also ultimately be, I would say, creating political groups in India which will be democratic in nature superficially, but their democratic politics will also be based on then Islamic identity. For instance, we have Mr. Asaduddin Owaisi. He is a person who fights elections, comes to the Lok Sabha, but his entire politics revolves and rotates around the Muslim causes and a very communal style of politicking. So Turkish activities in India, especially the outreach among the Muslim community, will generate such tendencies in the long run. Here, just a little digression. I would also like to mention that an important reason for Erdogan making an outreach to Indian Muslims is that in the Middle East, he knows that his claims to caliphate will meet resistance from the Arab leaders.
There were a couple of questions. I'll once again go back to Abdullah and then come back to you, Abhinav, for some more questions.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there was one question regarding NATO going blind as far as what's happening in Turkey, and is there any compulsion for NATO to overlook what's happening in Turkey and the larger game plan of Erdogan? Erdogan's Islamic politics, and there's another question which is kind of related to this. Why is the Turkish population silent? That is one question that has come. If Abdullah can address these two. The second question about how Turkish population is silent, I would like to put it the other way. Why is Erdogan so popular that he's winning election after election? So if you can just address these three aspects. Thank you.
For one thing, the first casualty in this political Islamist experiment in Turkey is the media. He went after especially the largest media outlets, and first he seized them, took over the companies, turned into government mouthpieces. In 2015, for example, just before the election, he seized the third largest media outlet. which used to have 2 national dailies, 2 television networks, and 1 radio. And then in 2016, in March, he came after my former newspaper, which was the largest selling national daily in Turkey, 1.2 million copies on a daily basis. And then, of course, using the fake coup in July 2016, he shut down almost 200 media outlets. So there is no independent, critical, opposition, dissident media left in Turkey. When you don't have that, it's very easy for Erdogan to control the narrative. When he says or fabricates stuff, or his machinery like TRT, as Abhinav mentioned, or other pro-government outlets, there is no independent media group out there that can run their stories. They can fact check, and then turn back and tell to the Turkish people, look, this is not true. This is purely fabrication, a fake story. But we don't have that for the moment in Turkey, unfortunately. So there is why the Turkish population, they are not getting the real facts and the stories. Of course, it's very much difficult to convince the population when they feel the pinch from the economic and the financial difficulties, because they feel the impact right away. When they have struggle in making the ends meet, it doesn't matter whether the government controls the entire media landscape or build a narrative, very rosy picture, because they feel it. But when it comes to fundamental freedoms, rights, or this, how dangerous the political Islamist ideology for Turkey, the people on the street, they don't really pay attention to that, because they don't feel the immediate impact of those policy choices. So that's another factor. The third one, the crackdown on all the segments in the society is a huge. I'll give you some figures. All of a sudden, we saw 30% of the entire foreign service in Turkey. High-ranking ambassadors, diplomats, all of a sudden, they were pushed out from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. They were branded as terrorists. They were replaced in many cases by political appointees and Islamist figures. And the same for the military, for example. 70% of all generals and admirals, they were pushed out. These are huge figures. When you see this kind of severe crackdown across the board in all the institutions and all the non-governmental sectors, foundations, NGOs, unions, universities, they were shut down with the executive decision of President Erdogan. So I think the intimidation factor really work in that sense. The people are afraid to rise up, to make their demands. If they do, they immediately end up in the jail. Of course, there's a limit to that. I mean, to a certain point, it's gonna rupture. Is like a pressure building up. But we are not at that point, I think, yet. But as I said in the introduction, I think the opposition is getting smartened up. They are getting united, building a unified bloc in the election. So that gives us some glimmer of the hope for the future. But I think the main reason to be optimistic when it comes to Turkey is the economic and the financial structure of Turkey. They simply cannot sustain this in the medium and the long run. At the domestic policy-wise or the international policy-wise, you cannot sustain these wrong choices. You're gonna find yourself boxed, your back pushed to the wall, as Erdogan is feeling now in the region, and you'll see that impact. But it's gonna take some time. When it's on the first question, why NATO and Europe is not very much vocal for Erdogan's policies, I think the real politics plays a huge role in there. Erdogan is very clever in using the refugees as a trump card, although the European Union took some measures in that sense, build walls, take some countermeasures to prevent that migration as a card used by Erdogan. But still, it's a huge market. They still do business with Turkey, and they don't want to risk that. If you look at the big banks in Europe, for example, the Spanish and the French banks, if the Turkish economy go bankrupt, they are the ones who get affected most. So they don't want to see Turkey, of course, going bankrupt. So there are different factors play here. But all this perhaps can save Erdogan in the short run, but in the medium and the long run, these policies are simply not sustainable. They're going to hit the wall. They're going to have to go back to the normalcy. They're going to have to interact with the regional countries on a sensible level, like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Gulf countries. You need to have a working relationship with these countries. With the Europe, United States, you cannot sustain a huge economy by going against each and every opportunity against European Union, with the largest trading partner for Turkey, as well as the United States. I just want to comment on what Abhinav said. I think the propaganda machinery really works in that sense. We see the same impact in Turkey. I was in Afghanistan in 2015 in Herat, and I was surprised to hear they actually set up a website in Afghanistan in the local language. At the time, this Myanmar issue, refugee issue, Rohingya Muslims was on the agenda in Turkey as well as international news cycle, and this website set up by Erdogan's people in Afghanistan, they have been putting stories like President Erdogan sending the Turkish Navy all the way to Myanmar to go to crack down on the Myanmar government and to save the Rohingya Muslims. I mean, we know that's a fake story, but the people in Afghanistan, when they hear that stories from this website financed by Erdogan government, they believe in that. And another, of course, reason for doing this in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, other places, Erdogan uses this as to project back to the Turkey. They use these stories in the Turkish domestic landscape to mobilize, to fire up, to inspire his core supporters at the Islamist base. He has done this many times. I remember in one occasion, for example, he was making a speech in the parliament. Just a day before, a Turkish television sent a TV crew in Thailand, in Patani region, close to the Malaysian border. And they have been interviewing with the people there, telling them, you should say Erdogan is the leader of entire Muslims. He can come and save us. And then the next day in the parliament speech, Erdogan is telling the deputies, did you watch that TV segment the other night? The people in Patani region in Thailand, they are asking our help. So this is a two-way street, not only for the audience in those countries, but also projecting that back to Turkey. So I'll stop here, and then we can have perhaps more questions.
Yes, I'll now go to Abhinav. There is one question that has come. One of our participants wants to know and understand what sort of a support would Erdogan, get from the Indian Muslims. Will he really get some kind of a support from the Indian Muslims, and what sort of a support is he expecting from the Indian Muslims? That's one question that has come.
It's a very important question, I would say, because in fact, he is getting a huge support. Okay, in the last election, when he won the election, there were massive celebrations across the country, from of UP, places like Rampur. The common people, who would not know anything about, anything beyond the borders of this country, were celebrating his victory. Okay? There's this journal called Madhyamam, which is run by Jamaat Islamia. It just hailed his victory as some kind of a messiah, some kind of a person who is giving a new identity to the Islamic cause. In Kashmir, all the separatist leaders, they hailed his victory. So support he is definitely getting. Now here, there is a catch. The thing is that the Muslim community in India, if you approach the people with this whole religious badge that yes, I am the caliph, and you have this whole history of Turkey, this Ottoman Caliphate behind you, and if you are exploiting the weak, I would say, nerve of the people, the religious sentiment, then definitely you're likely to get support, and this is the reason why he's getting support. Besides that, there is one other reason. In his once again coming to the Erdogan's propaganda machinery. So he is projecting a narrative that the Muslims in India are facing a prospective genocide, at the hands of the Hindutva groups, which is a complete false, and they are facing an existential threat from the Hindu right-wing elements. This is the narrative which he is projecting and making it very powerful and communicating it very powerfully among the Muslim community in India. Okay, the local political leaders, some of the I would say even the mainstream media houses, the leftist intellectuals, even the mainstream public intellectuals, some of the liberal leftist intellectuals also, they are aiding to, in a way, deliberately, intentionally or unintentionally, supporting this narrative. So when you are projecting this narrative, and already there is a ready audience to accept this kind of a narrative, and in the middle of it, when Erdogan comes as a new person, like, who is willing to give a new leadership, and to address all your insecurities and all your fears, as a person, who is a rallying point for the entire Muslim community, he's certainly likely to get support. So he is getting good support in India. Here, I would like to add that, it is not just about some kind of a political support. Well, one more thing which I would like to bring here. So Erdogan's caliphate, as far as I understand it, his entire purpose is to seek his own political power. I mean, it has not much to do with religion or anything with the Holy Quran. It's just, just to boost his own geopolitical strength, his political ambitions. He wants to be a symbolic figurehead, which can, who can hold immense control over the Muslim community of the entire world, and especially the South Asia. So that way, that is one way. But it can be very detrimental in terms of its fallouts, because if on one hand he is projecting himself as a religious, on the other hand, we must not forget that he has very strong ties with the terrorist groups across the world. Okay? He used Turkish intelligence to supply weaponry, funding to the terrorist groups like Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in Africa. Almost a month back, we got Mr. Ahmet Yayla, the former Turkish counter-terrorism officer, for a webinar here, and he spoke at length about how he facilitated the movement of the ISIS fighters. Even Robert McGurk, the US Special Envoy for the coalition against ISIS, he spoke on record saying that Turkey facilitated the movement of 40,000 ISIS fighters to Syria. Erdogan's son-in-law, running a company called Power Tracks, they were buying the Syrian ISIS oil and selling it to European countries. So all these linkages can be very helpful in entrenching and empowering ISIS and Al-Qaeda in India. And Islamic State in Khorasan province has already become a very powerful force in Afghanistan. Americans are going to withdraw. After that, the entire Afghanistan will be controlled by ISI and its proxies. Okay? The Taliban is also an ISI proxy, and we know very well how close ties Taliban, ISI, and or Pakistan and Turkey have. So Turkey is certainly going to have a deep, very strong footprint in Afghanistan. So there, if they entrench themselves, they are going to help and support Kashmir-centric terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. So the Kashmir-centric terrorist groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar, they already have linkages with the Haqqani network and Lashkar. This all works like an ecosystem. So Turkey, especially Erdogan, most likely he's going to have a deep footprint in Afghanistan, or I think he already has it, and he's going to assist the Kashmir-centric terrorist groups in terms of weaponry, in terms of training, in terms of financing, and in terms of logistics. And I would also like to mention that Turkey has come up as a major drones technology superpower in the world. They have this Anka-S and Bayraktar drones, which were very successful against the Russians most recently in Syria. So quite possible that these drones may end up with the Kashmir-centric terrorist groups. And Kashmir being a very densely populated area, if these drones end up with the terror groups, they will use it against to bomb civilian installations, military installations, or security forces headquarters. It can be very dangerous. That way, it's going to be very difficult for, a challenging task for Indian security forces to tackle that. In the other parts of India also, The groups like Jaish and Lashkar, and they have sleeper cells in the northeastern India, especially Assam, in Kerala, in the entire border of UP, where you have, the Rohingya migration is facilitated, channelized through that network. So Turkey or Erdogan's, I mean, his links with all these groups will also empower him to create such networks and sleeper cells in other parts of India also. And it's very easy. I mean, that's how the intelligence agencies function and work. It's very easy to organize or execute an act of, a bomb blast, or maybe foment a communal riot or a civil protest, something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Abhinav. I'll go back to Abdullah, and I'll ask you a question, larger question, basically a geopolitical question. What is it that gives Erdogan the confidence to challenge Saudi Arabia's dominance in the Islamic world? Is the money power, or is it the religious strength that he kind of exposes, or is it the military power? Because Turkey is also very important defense industry powerhouse. What gives him that confidence to challenge Saudi Arabia's dominance in the Islamic world? One second, I'll just unmute.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, to claim the leadership for the Islamic world. I think when you listen Erdogan's speeches, each and every occasion, he mentions so many different countries, from Pakistan to Africa to Europe. He speaks like he's already caliph. He's addressing to the Muslim population, the majority ones in the eastern part of Turkey, and the minority groups in the Western world. So he sort of, when he won the election, he sends a message to these people. Of course, there is a entire machinery behind that messaging. Of course, not only through direct contacts by the Turkish, government agencies like embassies, Maarif Foundation, and development agencies as such, but also on the second track with the NGOs, mostly Islamist NGOs. They flesh out that kind of messaging afterwards. So this is for one. Let me briefly mention before I go, extensively on responding to the question. Let me focus on the narrative that Abhinav mentioned. The narrative they built is really connecting to many people for a variety of reasons, because of the frustration, social and economic difficulties, lack of freedoms and as such in many countries. So people sort of find a venue in Erdogan narrative to identify themselves. So he sort of built this block around this narrative, and we sort of need to develop a counter narrative to be able to fight back, to push back this very dangerous narrative we hear from the current government in Turkey. I don't see a lot of effort is actually being spent on this, building a counter narrative. The main reason why Erdogan, for example, in Turkey went after Gülen group is because they are the largest dog in the block. They have been providing a huge counter narrative to ambitions, the Caliphate ambitions of Erdogan. In fact, Erdogan approached back in 2009 to use these Gülen schools in different countries as a launching pad for his own Islamist project. And Gülen himself said, no, we are not gonna do it. This is gonna undermine, the host countries, and we don't want to do that. So that's the reason why actually the two fell out, not because of this corruption investigation in 2013. It started, long before that. When the Arab Revolution started in 2011, Erdogan sort of felt he could turn so many of these countries from the Gulf to the North Africa region and replace the leadership with Muslim Brotherhood figures. He sort of succeeded this in Tunisia, did his best in Libya, still doing it with all the military investment going there, training and as such. He sort of briefly succeeded in Egypt. The Morsi campaign is effectively run by Erdogan's campaign manager. They provided huge financing as well. but it didn't last thanks to the strong institutions in Egypt, and he has dumped everything in Syria to make sure that Assad gets toppled and a Muslim Brotherhood guy eventually come to power in Syria. Because of the Russian involvement and Americans' reluctance, he didn't get too far. But I mean, he supported each and every group there, from Al Qaeda, from Islamic State, Al Nusra, anybody and everybody who can take up arms and fight against Assad. He supported. That's quite a contrast. For example, when we look at back in the early years of American intervention in Iraq, there are so many jihadist aspirants coming to Turkey from all over the world to fight in Iraq against the American occupation, and they were trying to use the Turkish territory, but they didn't get too far because the institutions in Turkey is very much strong. The crackdown was very strong, so many of them get arrested, and eventually that route is simply didn't work out for the jihadist group, especially Al Qaeda in the heydays of this Iraqi conflict. But in contrast to what we saw there, when the Syrian crisis started in 2011, it's completely different picture. I published confidential NATO documents before, and all of them were saying 95% of all these violent jihadist people ended up in Syria went through Turkey. And we know that for a fact through different criminal investigations in Turkey. They have been, using wiretaps and other means, and all of them eventually pointed out the Turkish intelligence agency doing all kind of nasty stuff, facilitating the transfer of the jihadists, in some cases providing funding directly or getting some from Qatar or third countries and funneling them to jihadist group in Syria. And when the prosecutors and the police chiefs try to go after these networks, they hit the wall. Erdogan protected them, then they were pushed out from the government service. So we are facing a non-state, non-rational actor model in Turkey today. You could sort of compare to what we see from time to time to Iranian leadership. He's building a proxy groups in many different countries, using different tactics and the means depending on the landscape. In Europe, mostly financing. In Middle East, using arms and other means. In Africa, using education like these Marif schools they have been building, including Asia, like in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So they use different means and the tactics to build these proxy groups, and they're going to be using this in terms of the crisis to promote their agenda. For example, the European Parliament, they put Turkey on notice. They don't want Turkish interference in the minority Turkish and the non-Turkish Muslim groups in many different European countries. They don't want to this proxy project going on by the Turkish leadership. But despite this grievances and the concern, they still continue to do so. So it is I talk at length perhaps, but when it comes to Arab countries, they really believe the population is on the side of Erdogan. They are fed up with their own leaders, and they are looking up for a role model. And Erdogan is positioning himself as a sort of Islamist leader, and the political machinery is there with the different languages. They pump up this narrative to the different population, and they are making inroads. When Erdogan needs them to get mobilized, as we have seen in many cases before, you see them, making protests, hating Erdogan. After the election of if Erdogan wants to send a message to different countries, you see them mobilize on the streets as such, or making statements like Zahir Naik making a statement to support this conversion of Hagia Sophia into mosque. So this is the playbook we see when we look at Erdogan, and it's going to get worse because there's a huge resources are going into this project, and it's going to get worse.
Thank you there, Abdullah. And now I go back to Abhinav. this question about what is the cultural influence that Turkey has on India's neighboring countries. Is there any sort of a cultural impact that Erdogan is able to bring in the Indian neighborhood?
Yes, as far as culture impact is concerned, a massive cultural impact, or a cultural influence, because, we have to see, I mean, here we need to remember that even in the Middle Eastern world, Turkey, it has been a very rich civilization. It has a very rich civilizational legacy and a history. There's this whole thing of Ottoman, I would say, rule going on of King Mehmet and the conquest of the Constantinople, then the flourishing of arts and sciences. So the Muslims in South Asia, in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, they look towards Turkey as kind of a phase where they had a very rich, flourishing history, and an era where they've progressed in civilizational matters, in sciences, warfare, technology, arts, everything. So the cultural impact is very huge. In fact, this is one of the reasons why the Saudi financed Salafism is not able to make much impact in India, and the Turkish President Erdogan finds it very easy to make an impact in South Asia, because the Saudi brand Salafism or the Saudi sponsored Salafism, it doesn't strike chords with the Indian subconscious, the subconscious minds of the Muslim populace in India and South Asia and rest of the countries also, because historically there was not much connect. In fact, in the Middle Eastern world also, the Saudi Arabia came into fore only like very lately in the 1930s and 20s, especially after this long era of rivalry between the House of Saud and the Ottomans. So there's this complete historical disconnect between the Arabs and Indian Muslims. But yes, with Turkey, there is a very rich historical connect, and this is the reason why there's this strong cultural influence. In fact, in the recent times, when you see this whole Ertugrul Ghazi has become a massive hit in Pakistan. In fact, Imran Khan, he publicly said that, you must watch Ertugrul Ghazi. In India also, it is a massive hit. I mentioned earlier, people in Kashmir, they are naming their kids and daughters after the characters in the serial. So there is a cultural connect. And even now, if you see, the areas where Turkey has made deep impact are those areas which were active during the Khilafat movement also. In Hyderabad, in Kerala, in Lucknow, in Calcutta. So these are the areas which were very strong centers of the Khilafat movement, which happened in 1919. The very fact that they're making a strong impact in these areas itself shows that the cultural ties are in fact a very strong factor enabling them to find a foothold in India.
I got to Abdullah and asked him this question, a question that kind of hangs in the in midair, basically, as far as the Islamic world is concerned. The troubles of the Uyghur community in China. So the general complaint is that no Muslim nation takes up their cause. What is Erdogan's stance as far as the Uyghur issue is concerned, and how is his relationship with China?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and sort of complicated one. Since economic and financial difficulties, Erdogan sort of turned to China as an outlet to, throw some investment in exchange for being sort of silent on the Chinese crackdown on the Uyghur, Muslim population. But on the other hand, since 2011, we sort of seen how Erdogan government radicalized, especially the diaspora Uyghur community in Turkey. When you look at the statistical figures, in terms of the detentions in Turkey at the border areas, the Chinese Muslims, meaning Uyghurs, they were the number ones in 2014, 2015. They're on the top of the list. They try to get into Syria to fight on the side of different jihadist groups. Sometimes they establish their own brigades and very violent, very radical, brigade. And they were using the Turkish territory with support of the Turkish intelligence. In fact, there are so many of them. They got a Turkish passport from the intelligence agency. As soon as they get out of China, sometimes through neighboring countries, Thailand, Malaysia, and others, ended up in Turkey. And through Turkey, they went to Syria to fight against, Assad. It was a helpful cause for Erdogan government because they want to topple Bashar al-Assad government. So they actually welcome it. They encourage it. So it blowback to this, to Uyghur community in Turkey and sort of radicalize them. And the Chinese government, of course, they have been using masterfully this radicalization process in the hands of President Erdogan's Islamist agenda to respond this human rights violation in the Xinjiang region. So this is, I think, the Uyghur community in Turkey and around the world sort of got a huge damage because of this experiment by the President Erdogan. Thousands of them, they moved through Turkey, and they got travel papers as such, and ended up in Syria to fight for Erdogan's dirty war, jihadist agenda. But of course, at the international level, since they need a Chinese investment, especially when you have very troubled relation with the main trading partners, the European Union, and very bad relation with the Americans because of the wrong policy choices, trying to undermine the NATO structure. They had no choice and turned to the Chinese. And the Chinese, of course, both the Turkish government's silence on the crackdown on Uyghur by providing, extending credits, providing some funding and investment as such. So this is also expose the cynicism and hypocrisy on the part of the political Islamists. When they talk the talk, but when it comes to walking, they don't want to walk. Sometimes it's just an empty rhetoric without any flesh and the support behind it. But sometimes, of course, they actually take the policy decision and they move forward in the implementation phase. But so many people, of course, around the world, they don't realize this sort of double face we see in Erdogan. And again, that goes back to the narrative and independent media. And if you have the still independent and critical media in Turkey, not only the Turkish population would be hearing the fallacies of the Erdogan policy choices, but also the other Muslim groups around the world. They will be hearing the real stories coming out of Turkey. It's not just the one-side mirror. But that's why Erdogan actually killed the independent and critical media first and foremost, because he knew when that impediment went away, it will be much easier to sort of practice this political Islamist project that will draw all sort of different groups. As Abhinav mentioned earlier, sometimes groups, they're supposed to be conflicting with each other in terms of ideology, but they adore Erdogan's leadership. They look up to him. The same is true in Turkey itself. There are so many diverse Islamist groups, not violent ones, but they don't actually like each other. But when it comes to supporting Erdogan government, they get unified. They stand behind him. So I think the narrative is a key. The cultural element is absolutely crucial. And Erdogan government is masterfully, of course, exploiting this TV series, movies, and the cultural elements to promote this agenda.
I think the next question is also to you, Abdullah. One of our participants wants to know why Erdogan calls Iran his second home, and what is the sort of connection that he has with Iran, and what sort of a geopolitical connect or partnerships that are likely to happen in the next 6 months that you foresee.
Yeah. Well, it's also a very good question. One is, when you look at the senior leadership in President Erdogan government, so many of them nurtured themselves in their youth, in 80s, in 90s, fantasizing about this so-called Iranian Islamic Revolution. They read a lot of translated works from the prominent Iranian authors. They sort of look up to Iranian example as a as a glimmer of hope, perhaps to replicate in Turkey. Now, all these young people, grew up infantilizing the Iranian revolution. They are in a critical and a key position in the government today. Just to name few, for example, the head of the intelligence, the Turkish National Intelligence Organization, Hakan Fidan, he is very much connected to this group when he was young. He was attending the Shiite study circles, doctrinating by the Iranian Islamic Revolution, and now he's running the, a very important government agency, the intelligence service, with all the resources. And the senior chief advisor of Erdogan, Sefer Turan, who advises Erdogan on Turkish relations with the Muslim and Arab countries, he's also a pro-Iranian guy. In 90s, this guy used to write so many articles, promoting this Iranian revolution for the Turkish audience. So there are so many others, at the cabinet level, very key and critical position, running the policy decision in the Turkish government. So it's sort of, they are looking up Iran as a role model. When you look at the policy action, actually, in many cases, they also replicate the Iranian model. For example, the Iranian Islamic Revolution Corps, Quds Force, how they promote and develop proxies and assets in other countries. You can see the same in the Turkish intelligence agency doing the same now. It's unprecedented. I mean, we have never seen that played out before, but they are doing it today because it's run by a pro-Iranian group. In addition to the ideology, of course, there is a financial incentive for why Erdogan called Iran his second home. We saw that in December 2013, when a major corruption investigation became public. He's sort of using the Turkish state banks to launder the money, the IRGC Quds Force money, using the Turkish state banks, circumventing the sanction regime, especially the ones that imposed by the Americans. And in exchange for this facilitation, he's getting a kickback. If I remember, I was at Turkey at the time. Even Indian banks, they didn't want to pay, the oil, purchases from Iran through state banks. They didn't want to risk it. They don't want to clash with the Americans because, Americans are calling the shots in terms of the international financial, banking system. You don't want to, kicked out from that system, or you don't want to get penalized. So the Turkish state bank, Halkbank, which is the same bank that was exposed in this corruption investigation, is processing the Indian transaction at the time. So there's also financial and economic benefit that Erdogan government is getting, especially at the personal level, President Erdogan himself and his family members, from the Iranian regime. So there is a two reason for why Erdogan is actually called Iran as his second home.
Thank you, Abdullah. I go back to Abhinav now. Abhinav, I just want to understand from you, how does the Modi government in India currently look at Erdogan and Turkey, and what sort of a relationship could emerge between the two countries as of now?
Thank you, Bipindra ji. Okay. Before I address this question, I'll just like to add something to what Abdullah said. So here in India, Erdogan, in his outreach to the Muslim community, he is not emphasizing on Shia-Sunni frictions. So India has a very bad history of, I would say, Shia-Sunni frictions. So he's not, working or even giving importance to any of those frictions like Shia-Sunni conflict or the Salafi-Bareilly conflict. He's not doing that. That's a very strategic move. In Kashmir also, if you see, we have to connect the dots, at some places. In Kashmir, lately, you can see this, the rise of separatist sentiment in Kashmir also, among the Shia community in Kashmir. Traditionally, Shias have been regarded, most of the intelligence agencies, they believe that the Shias are not the part of the Kashmiri separatist movement or this, this jihadist militancy, which is primarily a Sunni extremist militancy. Shias are not the part of it. But over the last 2-3 years, if you look at the Muharram celebrations, The Shia community in Kashmir, they are openly coming out against the government of India and joining hands with the Hurriyat groups and, openly speaking against India and joining hands with the terrorist organizations. The strong linkages have come up in the Shia community in Kashmir with the Hezbollah, which is also a very significant factor. And on the other hand, Turkey's best friend Pakistan has realized that now is the time to cultivate Shias in Kashmir. That's why they have, started a mission to, especially through their Kashmir desk. Kashmir desk is a part of ISI which works specifically on Kashmir, okay, mostly the political and militancy related activities. Some good Shia officers in the Kashmir desk, especially to cultivate the Shia community in Kashmir towards the separatist or towards this, terrorist cause, okay. And recently, the China also entered into a deal with Iran, and you can connect, like, see these new connections coming up. This whole new group, Pakistan's ties with Turkey, okay. Turkey and I mean having calling Iran a second home. Okay, so all these actors, in the near future are going to act in unison as far as Kashmir or the India or South Asia is concerned. Okay, keeping their differences aside. Now coming back to the original question which you asked, let me put it very blunt. Okay, well, in India, especially, I mean, even whether the Hindu nationalist or the Indian intelligence agencies or the foreign ministries, there is this acute dearth of awareness about what's happening in the Middle East, okay, and what are the real ambitions of Turkey. I would say almost a big majority, an overwhelming majority, still believes that Turkey is a Kemalist power, still wanting to get into European Union, okay, and it's like a secular liberal thing, okay, and I mean, if you talk about these things, I mean, completely shut you down. Okay. In fact, I when I sent the paper to a couple of think tanks in India, they said that, well, this is all rubbish. What are you talking about? Okay. And so this is the first part. Okay. And secondly, yes, first there's this lack of awareness. Secondly, an acute lack of skills and competence to counter this propaganda warfare of Erdogan. He is expert, like he has, and Erdogan and their best friend Pakistan, they have mastered the art of raising proxy terrorist groups and the propaganda warfare. Unfortunately, we are majorly lacking in this, and we end up empowering groups and entities which, at the end of the day, act against the interests of the country or against the communal harmony of India. Okay. For instance, in Kashmir, Syed Ali Shah Gilani's, I think, his granddaughter, okay, Ruwa Gilani, okay, Ruwa Shah, she was sent to America, and reportedly or allegedly, okay, the Indian system was behind sending her on scholarships to US, and I think she has made her base in Turkey. Even Basharat Peer, a prominent New York Times journalist, like he's also, I mean, reportedly making quite frequent visits to Turkey. So I feel that I mean, like we lack in terms of competence and skills to counter this propaganda warfare. But what we at this time, what we need is there's an urgent need to come out with a counter narrative and counter this whole propaganda thing, and I mean, just be alert to this new threat coming from Turkey.
Yeah, this will be the last question of the day. I go back to Abdullah, since he's speaking to us all the way from Sweden. What do you expect will be the political outcomes in Turkey? Will there be a Turkish spring that will happen? Will there be a political change, or as Erdogan, kind of entrench themselves in the system where, and it's going to be very difficult to throw them out? What do you foresee likely happening in Turkey in the coming years, coming days and years? This is connected with one of the questions that our participant has asked. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's very good question. As I said earlier, I mean, in the short run, I don't expect any positive changes. It's going to get worse, and it's going to create a huge fallout. And it's not going to confine to the Turkish borders. We're going to feel the impact all the way, in India, to United States, in the Europe and Africa and other places, because he has opened the Pandora's box. He provided, a huge, perhaps, a misdirected ambition to so many different groups using these cultural elements, soap operas, TV series, the political speeches, media coverage as such. So the impact, the damaging impact from these activities is going to be felt for a long time, even after Erdogan is gone. And I know Erdogan is going to, be going soon, because in the medium and the long run, this is simply not a sustainable one. With everything he got, with a huge purge we see in all the sectors in the Turkish society and the government institutions, killing all the media, crackdown on the civil society, still he's getting only 50% of the vote, which is very questionable environment, not free and a fair election. He only gets 50% of the votes from the population. So the experiment that Turkey has gone through, last 80 years, 90 years of the republic, I think still there. It's going to come up eventually. When you add this, the economic and financial understructure of the Turkish governance, he doesn't have enough resources to subsidize this experiment. For example, right now his fund is, very much involved in Libya with the drone technology and, with the military training and as such, and moving the Syrian fighters to Libya. But all this, bankroll by the Qatari money is not financed by the Turkey. Turkey is providing the muscle, which is, very natural because they have the second largest army in the NATO alliance, but they don't have the financial means to keep this on a long-term basis. So it's gonna hit the wall eventually. But we cannot take this for granted. Yes, we can make a projection. It's not a sustainable one. We see this, the underpinnings, provide some road markers for this to make this assessment. But the damage that he has already inflicted, and he's gonna keep doing this, is gonna be huge, not only for the Turkish population, but for the entire Muslim communities around the world. So we have to have the countermeasures in place. Erdogan may be gone, but somebody else maybe try to replace him in the future, trying to push this agenda, perhaps not from Turkey, but perhaps some other country. So we have to have strong countermeasures, build institutions intact. Can you imagine this Turkish government-run schools in Africa, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, training thousands and thousands of the young kids in this political Islamist narrative? Every time Erdogan needs something, to show a support, these young kids, elementary school kids, high school kids, college, students, they are coming out in different parts of Africa, in Afghanistan. They are chanting, they are, giving, shouting slogans in support of President Erdogan. And these young kids are not going to go anywhere. They're going to, grow up, and they're going to be, holding a position in different sectors. So I think we cannot take it for granted. We have to keep fighting each and every day. I think I'm very much concerned when I heard, Abhinav saying, rightfully so, so many people lack the awareness of how dangerous this experiment is. They don't realize, the Turkey is completely different animal today. It's not the Turkey that I know, it's not the Turkey that I grew up. It's a completely different one. If that keeps, perhaps a longer, it will be very difficult to contain the damage. With that, let me stop.
Thank you very much, Abdullah, for that.
Bipindra ji, may I just add one more point? Just one last point.
Please go ahead.
This, what I'm going to, maybe it is an example of lack of awareness, or maybe it's deliberate. India's main opposition party, Congress party, it has an overseas wing, overseas Congress. They have opened an office in Ankara, okay? And they are, dealing with Erdogan and his radicalization network on a day-to-day basis, okay? So I mean, I don't know what should I say exactly. Is it maybe it is because of because of the lack of awareness, but that doesn't sound so because one of the prominent leaders of the Congress, Mr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, he said that the threat from Turkey is the biggest hidden threat to India now. But such offices, imagine what happens like in case if tomorrow Congress comes into power, such offices can be the conduits for money laundering, for supporting, assisting the radical Islamist terrorist groups in India. And democratic countries have a weakness. We have this huge Muslim population, and if Erdogan, I mean, he has already, I mean, majorly radicalized them, then it becomes a compulsion even for the political parties. Okay, so and he will, I mean, will be in a very strong position to use these weaknesses. Okay, so this is the level of threat which we are dealing with, we are facing with. I mean, with this, I'll rest my case, and I guess we have discussed enough what should be done. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you, for sparing your time, and thank you, Abhinav, for organizing this and also giving me an opportunity to interact with both of you. I
Always a pleasure.
thoroughly enjoyed. I have the pleasure of watching some Turkish serials on television. So that is my most basic and elementary introduction to Turkey. And otherwise, as a media person, I've been a journalist more than 2 decades now, and then through media reports we get to know. But I'm so glad that I could interact with you and get some direct insight on Turkey and Erdogan's plans and ideas that he has for the Islamic world, and the kind of danger that this experiment is posing. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation that both of you made, and for answering all my very elementary questions that I had. Basically, I kind of, from the layman's point of view, we wanted to understand what's happening in Turkey, and I think Abdullah was excellent giving us this presentation. And Abhinav, as usual, I know him as a personal friend. He has been excellent in presenting the Indian case as far as Turkey is concerned. Thank you very much, both of you. I think the general opinion among the participants who were here till now for the last 2 hours is that it's been a very insightful interaction and conversation today. So thank you very much. I also thank all the participants for joining us today. We look at quality, content in all our events, both Usanas and Law and Society Alliance. We both jointly organize a lot of events. We look at quality in those events. I think this is one of the most qualitative conversations that we have had. Thank you so much, both of you, and good night, everybody.
Thank you.
And good evening to Abdullah, because he's in
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, all the best. Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much. So with this, we come to the end of the evening. Thank you so much. See you all again soon in another event, another time. Thank you.